and welcome to this special broadcast by ILO Television marking the entry into force of the 2006 Maritime Labour Convention, the MLC, or as it's more popularly known, the Seafarers' Bill of Rights. To mark this historic occasion, we've come to one of the world's busiest ports, Singapore. Literally tens of thousands of seafarers and ships pass through this port every year. But of course, that's only a small fraction of those in the industry globally. Today, we're on the bridge of one of the most modern ships in the port today. This is the APL Yangshan. She's a container ship, almost 350 meters long, and she's owned by the Neptune Orient Lines Group, Singapore's national line, and she is flagged in Singapore. This is where we'll be holding our discussion about the MLC. First, let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Cleopatra Doumbia-Henry, who is Director of the International Labour Standards Department at the ILO and is the ILO's leading expert on the new MLC. Welcome, Clea.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Next to her, we have Captain Robin Fu. Robin is President of the Singapore Maritime Officers Union and so has a feeling for the workers in the seafaring industry. Thank you for coming on. Next to him, Daniel J.F. Tan. Daniel is Executive Director of the Singapore Shipping Association and so represents those who employ the mariners. And last but not least, Mark Lim, Deputy Director of Shipping and Deputy Director of Marine of the Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. So he speaks from the perspective of a government.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Also with me is the ILO's Adam Bauer, who will be handling questions and comments we get through social media during this program. Adam, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Yes, Sophie. Viewers can tweet us throughout the programme with their comments and questions on the Maritime Labour Convention. They can tweet us at ILO News or simply by using the hashtag MLC2006. All tweets related to the discussion to use that hashtag MLC2006. Now, we've had lots of emails and tweets already this morning, and we encourage viewers to be in touch throughout the programme.
Great, okay. And Adam, if people need to learn a bit more about the MLC before they send us any comments, or just generally, where can they go?
Sure, they can also check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/ilo.org, or they can visit our website, which is a wealth of information on the MLC, at www.ilo.org.
Great, okay. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
We'll be coming back to Adam a bit later on in the programme, and as he said, please send us your tweets or your comments via the Facebook page, and we'll be bringing your comments into the discussion and putting them to the experts. However, before we get into our detailed discussions on the MLC, let's take a minute to put today's developments into context. Karen Nate Sekiguchi of the ILO has been looking at the history of attempts to create better working conditions in the maritime industry.
Shipping and seafarers are as central to world trade today as they were when the earliest traders sent the first ships off to distant ports. Seafaring holds a romantic place in the world's imagination, but the reality is more mundane. Those who work the seas, be they ship owners, captains, or seafarers, have never wanted more than to make a decent living out of a dangerous, risky, and unpredictable job. Since its creation in 1919, the ILO has shared this goal of decent work by aiming to improve the lives of workers through the adoption of international treaties known as conventions. The specific nature of the maritime industry led to the creation of special machinery by the ILO to deal with this sector. Over time, some 70 detailed maritime conventions were created, a large number for governments to uniformly enforce and ratify.
In the part of the world we are well covered with the laws. In the other part kind of world we are not so well covered. So if I don't have the law support, I cannot do anything. Because you know every country have own law, but sometimes it helps me, sometimes it don't help me.
Shipping has
always been one of the most international.
In February 2006, the Maritime Labour Convention 2006 was adopted at a special conference of the ILO. The new convention is firm on rights and flexible on implementation. Now, as the fourth pillar of international shipping regulation, it consolidates the rights of seafarers to decent conditions of work and helps create conditions of fair competition for ship owners.
We have set the bar extremely high for this convention. The requirements for its entry into force were the most stringent of any ILO convention. It called for ratification by at least 30 member states with a total share in the world's gross tonnage of ships of at least 33%. This convention shows how tripartite dialogue and international cooperation can operate constructively for this most globalized of all industries by concretely addressing the challenges to securing decent working and living conditions for seafarers while simultaneously helping to ensure fair competition conditions for ship owners.
I love the sea, I love the ships, I love the things which are going on the ship. I love to make watch. I love to stay on bridge. It's an unbelievable feeling.
That report was by Karen Nate Sekiguchi of the ILO. Right, let's turn back to our panel now. And I think we should start with the most basic question, which is, why is the MLC so significant? Cleo, perhaps you could give us the ILO's perspective on this one.
The MLC is significant because it brings together more than 70 ILO conventions and recommendations adopted by the ILO since 1920. And this time, the idea is to bring all together in one place so that it is easily accessible, easy to understand, and easy to enforce, so that in reality, seafarers can expect to be able to enjoy decent working conditions.
And Robin, from the seafarers, from the workers' perspective, why is the MLC so significant?
Well, the MLC will provide the seafarers their rights. They know their employment rights, the issues that they can have if they have a problem on board the ship. They can bring it up to the masters, there's proper procedures. And the condition on board the ship has to be met under MLC. So with the MLC in place, I think this is a way forward, and we are very glad that it has come about.
And some of these things that you mentioned, abilities to get grievances resolved, standards and conditions on board, these were lacking in the past?
At least I wouldn't say it's lacking in the past because we have the procedures before, but with the MLC in place, it gives a stronger mandate and proper procedure to follow for all international vessels.
Okay, thank you. And Daniel Tan from the Singapore Shipping Association, from the employer's perspective, what's so important about the MLC?
I think it's an important convention. Basically, it's considered as one of the pillars of the which basically govern the shipping industry, apart from the three IMO conventions. And I think it provides, decent employment to the seafarers. And as employers, I think we have to be seen to take care of our seafarers on board the ship. So in that sense.
And Mark, from the perspective of a national authority, why is this important?
Singapore is a major global hub port and a major flag. We recognize the contributions that ships and the seafarers who work on the ship brings to world trade and the global economy. Now, whether you are a major port or only a one ship operator, we have to recognize that the seafarers need to have decent living conditions and conducive working environments. And the MLC brings it possible to have these standards internationally. So we are extremely happy that the MLC actually has come into force today, and we are able to see the seafarers enjoy the benefits and the welfare that they rightfully deserve.
Cleo, this convention was agreed in 2006. It's now 2013. Some people might feel that implies that it's taken a long time to get this thing into force. Is that the case?
Well, I think, no, it's a very realistic timeline for something as, I would say, sophisticated, as comprehensive as the Maritime Labour Convention is. While we would have initially thought it would take 5 years, but it requires effective implementation. And as indicated, it brings together quite a number of ILO conventions, and both governments have to adopt laws, national legislation, inspection systems must be put in place in order to make the rights included in the convention effective. You also, ship owners also must ensure their ships comply with the convention requirements based on the national laws of flag states. And it requires, in fact, a real change in how the employers see these rights today. And therefore, all of these things take time, as well as the fact that we want to ensure that everyone, the ownership, the national social dialogue, is used in order to be able to implement the convention, because the ownership of it requires that at the end of the day, it delivers for the seafarers.
And why were tougher entry into force requirements put on this convention, I mean, compared to some others?
We wanted to be sure, and I think the social partners, the tripartite constituents that drafted and worked for a period of 5 years to get to the stage of the adoption in 2006, they wanted to be sure that there was not just ownership in the design and development, but there was also the ownership in terms of enforcement, because that is the key, I would say, value added of the convention. It has an inspection regime that really enables delivery on the rights. And the ownership, we wanted to be sure that when it does enter into force, it had the full ownership of the entire industry.
Great, okay. Well, we'll be looking at the inspection regime a little later in the programme. But first, it's quite hard for non-sailors to know what it's really like to work and live on a ship. The ILO's Marco Minocri has joined the ship of the APL Yangshan's sister ship, the APL Boston, who is currently cruising from China to Singapore. He reports now on the life of a modern seafarer.
We are on board the APL Boston, a 328-meter-long container ship. Yesterday, we all left the port of Chengdu in the southern Chinese province of Guangdong, and we're now en route to the port of Singapore. It's a unique opportunity for the ILO to visit a container ship at sea and discover what's it like for the crew to live and work on such a huge vessel. We are getting to know the crew members, and we have been following Dinesh, one of the third officers on board.
At sea, I normally wake up at around 7 o'clock, and then I go get ready and go for my breakfast. And after breakfast, 8 o'clock, my daily work starts. 8 o'clock will be my watch, navigation watch, from 8 to 12.
25 years old Dinesh has a well-structured working schedule which goes beyond the navigational watch.
After 12, I break out for my lunch. Again, 1 o'clock, I go for my daily maintenance work.
Despite his routine is quite busy, with the last shift ending at midnight, Dinesh copes well with fatigue.
I got enough rest before coming to watch. I get enough rest, then only I can take over watch from the officer.
Dinesh loves his job and being at sea. Thanks to the APL Boston's onboard facilities, seafarers like Dinesh can easily stay in touch with their families at any time despite being in the middle of the sea. Dinesh's dream is to become captain one day, and he doesn't miss any opportunity to learn from his master.
Of course, captain is the most experienced person on board. We are still in the learning one. We gain knowledge from him. We share everything, whatever he has experienced here.
Before starting his last shift at night, Dinesh joins his fellow seafarers at the onboard recreational room for a pool game. But it's time to wear the uniform again and go back to the bridge, where Dinesh has to be vigilant, promptly respond in case of any unexpected problem, and complete his duties before going to sleep and rest for a new day at sea.
That report was by the ILO's Marco Minocri. Captain Robin Fu, I think I should come to you after that and ask you, you spent a lot of time at sea. Was that an accurate reflection of what you remember?
Well, the first time I went to sea was more than 4 decades ago. And it was a different experience altogether compared to today's shipping.
Hopefully his experience was better than your experiences 40 years ago.
Yes, certainly.
But some of the characteristics that he mentioned must be the same. For example, Dinesh mentioned fatigue.
Yes, certainly it depends on the run that you're doing, especially on a container ship. If you are doing a container ship run, especially in Europe. Between ports, the run could be short and you have your duties to cover. So with the MLC in place, you will have definitely proper rest, and I think it will be better for overall. Definitely you will be much improvement in this area compared to those days. Yeah.
It sets out specific hours that
Yes.
you can work and then you have to be able to
Yes.
rest. Can you give me an example?
Well, the thing is, I'm referring back to my old days, because in my old days, you may be working 12 hours straight, and there's no rules with this.
And Daniel, from an employer's perspective, regulating hours and trying to control fatigue in seafarers presumably has advantages for you too.
Certainly, I think where the seafarers, I think when they work on board a ship, they definitely need rest at times, you know. So I think there are rest hours that are being provided, you know, and recreation time, even for that, you know.
Cleo, one of the key things, of course, is which ships the MLC covers. Could you give us a quick rundown of what is covered and what is still excluded?
Well, that's one of the, I would say, far-reaching impact and implications of the MLC, in that it has very broad coverage of all ships. The only ships that are excluded are ships that navigate exclusively inland waters, or naval ships, or ships that can, what we call, ships that are the sort of very old ships.
Traditional ships, dhows and things like that.
Dhows and junks. Everything else is covered by the MLC, and therefore it includes the cruise industry that never thought before that they were covered. It includes the yachting industry. So it has much broader coverage today than the existing ILO conventions had.
So it includes small vessels as well as large ones like this?
Yes, the difference between small and large vessels is that depends on whether or not they are actually operating internationally. If they are operating internationally, they must carry a maritime labor certificate and a declaration of maritime labor compliance, irrespective of size. However, if they are less than all ships, whether you are 10 tons or 200 tons or 500 tons and more, or 10,000 tons like this ship on which we are now, from which we are broadcasting, they all need to be inspected. All ships must be inspected for compliance with the Maritime Labour Convention, of course with some flexibility built into the convention for certain types of ships.
Right, well, let's just pick up on that point, because it's often said that regulations are only as good as their implementation. And as Cleo just mentioned, a core part of the ILC is a very tough regime of inspection. For example, one innovation brought in under the new convention is the certification of 14 different aspects of living and working conditions on board. The ILO's Patrick Moser reports now on the work of the maritime labour inspectors, whose job it is to ensure that the MLC turns into concrete improvements.
In Panama's port of Balboa, a container ship is being inspected for compliance with the Maritime Labour Convention 2006. The inspector looks into all aspects of the seafarers' working and living conditions.
That includes anything from relaxation areas, dining rooms, food storage and preparation, as well as respect for all cultures present on board, wages and working conditions, and of course, both the flag state and port state will strictly verify the certification that all officials and seafarers working on board are required to have.
A key document is the Maritime Labour Certificate, which confirms compliance with the Convention. It serves as a kind of ship's passport and helps fast-track port formalities.
With the MLC, we now have an additional control. It's something that not only helps us, but it helps the competent authorities that control us at the same time.
Adopted by the ILO in 2006 and ratified to date by more than 40 countries, representing over 70% of the world's fleet, the Maritime Labour Convention 2006 provides comprehensive protection at work for seafarers.
It's a very, very special piece of legislation that will ensure that we can protect seafarers that are members of unions, but also seafarers that are not members of unions. So we'll be looking to use the complaints procedure, the consultation with port state inspectors and flag state inspectors to make sure that seafarers' rights are fully protected in all areas of the Maritime Labour Convention.
Maritime transport is the backbone of international trade and the driving force for globalization. But for the world's 1.5 million seafarers, there had never been a clear set of rules and standards. The MLC 2006 changes that.
Now it's improved because they can bring the documents for the safety on ships, especially the life of all seamen.
The MLC 2006 also helps protect quality ship owners against competition from ships where working and living conditions are substandard.
Ship owners are always looking for what we call a level playing field. So they're looking for equal application so that the costs on individual ship owners are the same, whatever trade they're in and whichever countries they're trading to. And I think that the Maritime Labour Convention will apply the level playing field very well in terms of standards of employment and working conditions on board the ship. So that levelling is the major advantage for the ship owner.
The result of an unprecedented consensus among governments, ship owners and seafarers organizations, the MLC 2006 will help improve working and living conditions on board the world's fleet and promote fair competition among ship owners.
That report was by the ILO's Patrick Moser. Before we get back to our panel discussion, let's just have a quick look at social media and find out what's going on in the world of Twitter. Adam, what's it saying about the MLC?
Yes, certainly. So the International Chamber of Shipping in the UK have been in touch to ask, when will the MLC really start to have an impact on seafarers? Also, similarly, the International Transport Workers Federation in the UK asked, how soon do you think seafarers will notice a difference following the MLC's coming into force? And perhaps related to inspection, Tran Min, who's a captain of a Vietnamese container ship on international routes currently, he says, is it correct that as of 20th of August, any ships that arrive at a port belonging to an MLC member country will be checked according to the convention?
Right, thanks Adam. Okay, I think that's an excellent question to put to Mark Lim. Mark, if a ship from a country that has not ratified the MLC comes to Singapore, can you inspect it?
Yes, there's a provision in the MLC where the country who ratified the MLC will not give any more favorable treatment for those ships that are from non-ratifying countries. What it means is that our ships will comply with the MLC. Singapore flag ships comply with MLC. If a foreign ships come to Singapore, we will not give them better treatment than our own ships, which means we expect foreign ships to comply whether the flag has ratified the MLC or not. So we will still go on board a ship and do our inspection. They may not be carrying the MLC certificate because their flag don't issue the certificate, but we want to inspect to ensure that they are in compliance nonetheless with the requirements of the MLC.
And what can you do if you find a ship from a country, flagged to a country that has not ratified the MLC, which does not meet the standards of the MLC?
Okay. If there are reason to believe that there is a major non-conformance, in other words, the ship is not complying with the MLC in I would say a serious manner, we may actually detain the ship and make sure they rectify the non-conformance before we can allow the ship to leave. But if it's a non-conformance that is of a minor nature, we might just give an observation to the master to rectify the fault or the non-conformance and advise them that they should keep track of the requirements and make sure that their ship is in compliance every time they enter into our port or any port for that matter. So the nature of what we do to the ship depends on how far they are from the requirements of the MLC.
But if the breaches are particularly egregious, can you detain the ship?
Yes, detention of the ship is to ensure that the ship do not operate as it is. They are already in non-conformance. So if we allow the ship to still operate, we are effectively saying that you don't have to comply, you can just operate as you like. So detention is the means to ensure that they rectify the non-conformance before they are allowed to operate. Now, some non-conformance can be easily rectified. Some may take a little bit more time. So there's this regime, the port state control regime, where we may allow the ship to leave to the next port and they rectify at the next port. So it all depends on how much can be done to rectify the non-conformance and how easily it can be done.
And if a Singapore ship from a country that has ratified goes to the port in a country where there has been no ratification, can that country also inspect the Singapore ship?
The country that has not ratified the convention will not have the means or the power to inspect our ship and detain our ship for non-compliance. But we will require all Singapore flagships to comply regardless of whether they are operating in the country that is party to MLC or not. So if we come to know that our ship is not complying, even though he's operating in a non-MLC state, we may also require the ship to rectify the non-compliance.
Daniel, from the employer's perspective, we saw on the report one of your colleagues welcoming this as creating more of a level playing field. Do you think this is going to make catching what one might call rogue ship owners easier?
I think, well, there are all kinds of ship owners out there, you know, and if you talk in terms of seafarers, I think 75% of them actually come from developing countries. You know, you talk about 1.5 million seafarers, and some of these seafarers may be ignorant of what their rights are. So in a way, I think MLC brings up the awareness to all the seafarers of their rights. You know, so it's important that all ship owners are competing on a level playing field in that sense.
Cleo, it was mentioned there the issue of no more favourable treatment. Could you just explain in a couple of sentences what that means?
Well, exactly, I think, as Mr. Tin explained, because it means that a country that has not ratified the convention ought not to benefit from the in fact, the protection the convention provides, because the convention is there to support the quality ship owner. And a country, a ship owner that does not meet the requirements of the convention should not be allowed to operate. And that is what the normal favorable treatment really is about. It's really about, in other words, it's a stick within the convention. It is, and it is also about the maritime labor certificate that the ship must have. And the quality, I mean, if you're not a quality ship owner, it's very difficult to see how you're going to have a maritime labor certificate in compliance with the convention, a certificate and a declaration of maritime labor compliance, attesting to the fact that the ship meets the requirements of the convention. You can only do that if you're a ship that's flagged in a country that has ratified the convention. So it is a disadvantage, effectively, not to ratify the convention because you will not be allowed to trade normally.
Right, well, let's just go back quickly to one of the other questions that was asked by one of our Twitter correspondents. When will the MLC really start to have an impact on ordinary seafarers? Robin.
Well, I would take it that it's starting from today. From today onwards, the seafarers will be aware of what's happening. And with that, I think everyone, especially the tripartite partners that we have in Singapore, we will be able to do our part to get this going, and we'll improve on things that is happening.
So the essence of this convention is a practical difference for ordinary people working in the industry, right? Great, okay. Well, let's go for a minute and look at the other group of people who are closely involved with implementing the MLC standards on a daily basis. And that, of course, is the captains of ships like this. The captain of the APL Boston is Captain Thanabalan Govindraju.
My name is Thanabalan Govindraju. I'm a captain of APL Boston. We've been trained on MLC for just about 5 years back. We've been already trained by MLC, and then we already received all the booklets, some circulars on MLC, and we already start preparing it beforehand. I like about this MLC because now I know that all the crew, my officers are well trained, properly, they're qualified, and they've been paying the wages as per the agreement, and also provide them for the medical facilities, which is better, far better now. And then they're also enjoying all kind of other facilities like accommodations, recreational, good quality food. Providing now all the seafarers, they're coming to sea, they will know their right, what they're supposed to, what they're entitled for and what they're supposed to get. Then it's very transparent nowadays for seafarers. Now we have we call things like complaint procedures. If any crew, they come and look for us, things, they have their right to complain about anything on board the ship, including their living condition, food, water, wages, anything. They can go and see the head of department. Once they discuss with the head of department, then the head of department will bring the matter to me, then I'll try to solve the matter on board the ship. If I'm unable to solve them, then I'll bring to my company. So that's the one thing good about the MLC.
Okay, that was a captain's view of life on board and the MLC. Cleo, I'd like to come back to you about one of the points that was made by one of our Twitter correspondents, which is the issue of implementation. Not all countries are as lucky as Singapore. What about developing countries with limited resources? How can they be expected to implement the MLC?
Well, developing countries, as you just heard earlier from Dr. Tan, the world seafarers today come from developing countries. 2/3 of the world seafarers, if not more, and it's getting more and more that way. They by being the source of labor supply to the world fleet, they are an important contributor to the national GDP of their countries. If you take the Philippines, for example, the highest, let's say, rate of remittances being part of the GDP of the Philippines come from the maritime industry. So it is a huge contributor to the national economy. So one is the remittances. But secondly, developing countries are also important flag states. I take Liberia, a very important flag state. And therefore, flagging into countries like developing countries ought to have economic benefits. The problem is to make sure that those economic benefits trigger down to the ordinary people.
But
and
is it fair to expect ships flagged to developing countries to meet MLC requirements in the same way as Singapore?
Absolutely. It is absolutely essential that developing countries that want to be important flag states must meet the requirements of the MLC. It is the minimum international standard that has to be met by all flag states, irrespective of level of development. So that cannot be an excuse to have not comply with the level playing field concept and not to provide protection to seafarers that the MLC seeks to ensure actually happens, so that we don't have a paper tiger. We have something that really delivering on rights of seafarers in their day-to-day business of ensuring that international trade happens. We have to think about the important impact they have by making a major contribution to the global economy in what is the most globalized of industries.
And do they have a period of time in which they can come into compliance, or do they have to be in compliance from the moment the MLC comes into force in their state?
Clearly, they have to be in compliance from the moment the MLC comes into force, which is as of today. And whether they have ratified or not, all ships must come into compliance. Of course, there are two types of things. There is the port state control regime that kicks in also automatically on the Title V of the MLC. And there, of course, the port state control regime is the one that is more active on a day-to-day basis, with ships entering and leaving port, delivering cargo, loading cargo. But there is also the ILO supervisory mechanism that's behind us that will then be looking at how countries' legal implementation, in addition to the practice, or whether or not countries have in fact put in place the relevant legal framework, regulatory framework, to enable ship owners to meet the requirements of the Maritime Labour Convention. And there, the ILO supervisory mechanism will be triggered 1 year after entry into force for the country concerned. So I think there are two very important mechanisms that coherently work together that will make a major difference in the working lives of seafarers.
Mark, let me bring you in here. How long did it take Singapore to get its national regulatory framework into line behind the MLC?
The MLC covers a wide spectrum of labor conditions and working environments. There are already existing laws and practices in Singapore. As mentioned just now, the MLC is actually an amalgamation of 65 or more existing conventions. So some of these already enforced in Singapore and practiced by Singapore flagships. So we are in the process of consolidating also all these existing laws that we have and amending some of them to be in line with the MLC convention. At the moment, our ships will have to comply with the requirements of the MLC and show compliance and issue with a statement of compliance. The statement of compliance certifies that the ship is in compliance with the MLC requirements under our existing law, also under the Declaration of Maritime Labour Convention Part 1, which the MLC requires us to provide to every ship. And these requirements laid out in the DMLC Part 1 are all the 14 areas, comprehensive 14 areas that meets the requirements of the MLC. So our ships are all complying, waiting for inspection, waiting to get the statement of compliance. And once that is done, they will be able to carry the MLC certificate. Perhaps before the end of the year, they will be able to carry all the certificates to testify that they are in compliance according to the requirements. Okay. But they are in compliance even though they are not holding the certificate at the moment. They have a statement of compliance.
Okay.
And I think also may I add that the ILO has wisely expected that the ships, a lot of ships may have schedules that make it more difficult for them to get inspected, and the number of inspectors to cover so many ships in the MLC regime may at the moment make it quite challenging for all ships to be inspected in time. So the IMO have a resolution, I think 17, that allows ships to still operate without a certificate without the MLC certificate for 1 year, but the ships still have to show compliance, and that is what Singapore is practicing. We are following the MLC resolution.
That is correct, Cleo?
Yes, that is certainly correct. The conference in 2006, when it adopted the Maritime Labour Convention, recognized that there were some 40,000 vessels that would have to be inspected and certified to be in compliance with the Maritime Labour Convention. And it provided guidance to member states indicating that they should first focus on inspection of bulk carriers, tankers, and then move on to the others, and give 1 year to the first 30 countries that ratified the convention. So there was a little bit of a plus for the first 30 countries. Come on board, you'll have 1 year to bring all your ships into compliance, but that's just the first 30 countries.
Right, okay. Right, well, let's move on, because another important aspect of the MLC is that it recognizes that seafarers' welfare covers far more than just life on board. What happens to them in port is also key. Under the MLC, countries are also supposed to ensure that adequate shore-based facilities exist. So to learn a little bit more about seafarers' concerns and what they're looking for when they come to shore, I earlier visited a seafarers' centre run by the Port Authority of Singapore and spoke to some of the mariners who were there taking a break. What I'd really like to know, first of all, is from the perspective of a mariner, you've just got off a ship in the harbour and you've been on board for some days or weeks. When you come to a centre like this, what are you looking for?
Just basically looking for a chilled out place. It's like a small retreat for a while, just for a change. Maybe some good food, something to drink, little entertainment, phone calls, basically phone calls and internet, faster internet rather. Talk to the family and friends. Yeah.
Phone calls and internet to contact?
Yes, same also like that. Mostly for recreation, our self and phone calls.
Amenities and everything we already have on board. We have internet, we have phone calls, but we don't have a lot of people. That's the thing I might miss the most.
I think some of you know that the new Maritime Labour Convention is now coming into force. Are you aware of what that does for you?
Yes, it's made a lot of things very transparent. It's basically there now. Everybody, all the seafarers, they know their rights, what they should get. It's basically for their wellness, and it's a really good thing that's come into effect.
Do you find that some people do have problems with things like written contracts and proper rest hours and decent food? Do you hear stories from others?
Yes.
What sort of problems do they have?
Sometimes I just read only from the newspaper that sometimes they not take their salary, and also the food is not enough for them. But for our company, because of this MLC, now we have the rights, the well-being, and then also they insured about our medical, the accommodation and the recreation on board the ship.
So do you think the new MLC will make the seafaring profession a better one?
Yes, it will. It will definitely. Because now people understand what their benefits are. So this will increase the quality of working, and it will make happier seafarers. Once seafarers are happy, they will definitely be safer, and the quality of work will improve.
Okay, those sailors were at the Port Authority of Singapore's Seaman Centre. Before we go back to the panel, let's just check in with Adam and see what Twitter is tweeting about at the moment.
Yes, tweets are coming in. Actually, a couple that relate back to some of the video there on rest hours. We have something from Manola Fernandez from Veracruz in Mexico. She asked, what has the ILO done to fight non-compliance of work rest hours on board? And also Captain Mukesh, based in India. He asked, how can rest hour requirements be enforced on ships on short voyages or with limited crew?
Right, okay, so rest was raised by the sailor in our video and also on Twitter. Robin Fu, Captain Fu, let me ask you, how important do you think the new conditions of the MLC are to enforcing rest, and what else do you think seafarers are worrying about?
As you know, rest is the most important part when you're working on board the ship, because without good rest hours, without proper rest, then your work on board the ship will be definitely affected, and we don't want that to happen, because injury may happen, and you're not only hurting yourself, you'll be hurting your mates too. So with the implementation of the MLC now, you have proper rest hours that has to be complied with, and as I mentioned earlier on, you have if you are not getting enough rest, then you can always go up to the captain and speak to the captain about it.
Right, but Captain Mukesh in our tweet was asking about ships with small crews or on short voyages. How do you handle rest requirements in those conditions?
Well, I think the authority has certain...
The Tripartite Working Group has extensive discussion on these rest hours, especially for those ships on short voyages. The provision in the IMO allows for some exception for these rest hours to be reduced for ships on short voyages. And we have discussed, and we also have ensured that the definition of short voyages are clearly defined, because it's a little bit difficult for the master to decide for himself, is this a short voyage or is there a short? So we define the short voyages to make it very clear that when the ships are in this operation, this voyage, you can allow them to have exemptions to the standard required on the MLC for minimum hours of rest. However, there's also another convention, which is the Standard of Training and Certification of Watchkeepers. This is under another UN agency, which is the International Maritime Organization, which limits the rest hours, whether it's an exception or not an exception. In other words, you're not to go below that rest hour. And the reason is because of Captain Fu mentioned safety. We do not want the seafarer to have fatigue, and there's a safety issue. And it's also a productivity issue. I mean, he will not be able to do as much for the ship unless he has given enough rest. So we have extensive discussion, and our ship owners and our seafarers are quite happy with what we have for them.
Right, I just want to come back to Robin Fu now, because the other issue the sailor in our video mentioned was wages. Obviously important, yes?
Yes, certainly that's one of our core area as a union. The thing is, if you can see the clip earlier on, the third officer was in his cabin doing the internet and chatting with the family and all. So the other thing is, I must really say this is thumbs up for NOL, APL, for having an internet connection on board the ship, and I understand that their salary will be paid on time. They can go into the internet to check on their wages. So if they're not paid, they can always go back to the company and say, why I'm not paid? So there and then at the end of the month, they will be paid.
Right, well that's obviously a very good thing. Okay, now another innovation of the MLC is that it broadens the range of people who are covered. Not everybody who works at sea is a sailor. In the past, this has prevented some workers from getting the kind of coverage which they should have been entitled to. For example, chefs, doctors, waiters and entertainers on cruise ships. The MLC ensures that these staff now get the same protection as their shipmates. The ILO's Patrick Moser reports.
Mention the word seafarer, and it's pretty unlikely that waitstaff or onboard entertainers will come to mind. But the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, known as the Seafarers' Bill of Rights, extends to cruise ships just as it does to the merchant fleet. And hotel workers on this cruise ship in Savona, Italy, are well aware of this.
It gives us a high awareness for the crew members to have a decent accommodation, for our salaries, for our wages, repatriation, sickness, and then hospitalization, which we can get from our company.
La Convention sur le travail maritime est adoptée.
Adopted by the ILO in 2006, The convention has been ratified to date by more than 40 countries, representing over 70% of the world's shipping. It provides comprehensive protection for seafarers and promotes conditions of fair competition for ship owners. It covers all aspects of seafarers' professional lives, including contracts of employment, wages and working hours, food, accommodation and recreation on board, as well as medical care and social security. The MLC 2006 contains clear minimum standards, but allows a large measure of flexibility with respect to practical application, and it is both easily enforceable and easy to understand.
The contract is everything they put there. Example, if you doesn't agree, you said, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot sign, because everything does. The monthly pay, everything, even the public holiday, they put everything there. So it's clear for me, it's clear, it's no problem. For the contract, depend on national. I'm from Indonesia, though they will put English. English, everything is clear. No, like still dub, oh, I will sign or no. For me, I can read from A until last one.
For ship owners, the MLC 2006 is changing long-held attitudes about their workforce.
Today, ship owners cannot neglect ethical aspect and basic right of a seafarer. This industry, with all its peculiarity, has been for years too far from the labour market development and standards achieved ashore.
The result of an unprecedented consensus among governments, ship owners and seafarers organizations, the MLC 2006 charts the way for everyone on board to enjoy the right to decent work.
Okay, that report was by the ILO's Patrick Moser. Let's check in briefly again with Adam. I think Twitter has been busy. What have we got?
It has indeed, yes. We've got a Jim Bindell in Windermere in the UK. He asked about investment, and he asked, what can investors do not to invest in firms that profit from slavery at sea, either directly or via supply chains? And a question which we haven't covered quite yet, actually, Leung Van Sun, a seafarer on a Vietnamese container ship on international routes. Will the MLC help improve the gender imbalance among seafarers? He says all of Vietnamese seafarers so far are male.
Well, that's an interesting question. Let's pick that one up first. Will the MLC change the gender balance on board ship? By which I think he means, will it create more opportunities for women? Who would like to take that?
Let me take that.
Cleo, yes.
Being the only woman on the panel. Well, with you, of course. Well, I would say that probably the MLC is one of the most gender-sensitive ILO instruments ever adopted by the organization. And when the tripartite constituents were drafting the convention, they took very much in mind the importance of ensuring that it was also a tool, an important tool, to attract women to the industry. And therefore, it talks about, in terms of accommodation, for example, separate living room, bedroom quarters for women, and toilets, and takes into account the sanitary dimensions that are specific to women. So it is actually quite interesting for that. And of course, it has a non-discrimination clause built in, along with the other fundamental conventions of the ILO, into the MLC. So respect for the promotion of non-discrimination in the workplace, including around food and other measures. So I do think that we hope the MLC will be an inducement to women, young women around the world, to join the industry. Of course, issues around bullying and also areas of safety and health, which is quite extensive within the convention.
The sailor that we heard earlier at the Seamen's Centre was talking about how he thought the MLC, by introducing fairer conditions, would make happier workers and encourage more people to come in. I must ask our representatives from the workers and employers, do you think it would be a good idea if you had more women on board? Cadets, captains?
You want to start first, Daniel?
I think from a ship owner's perspective, we don't discriminate against lady officers or workers on board the ship. In fact, I think there were a couple of our ship owners who actually employ ship captain and ship officers on board. But unfortunately, I think for this particular ship, there aren't any ladies seafarers on board. I think we certainly welcome, in fact, we promote that. You know, we don't have any discrimination whatsoever in that respect.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel, because from the union perspective, we always encourage seafarers, if they want to come, the lady, to come on board, provided it is acceptable to the company, which I think like NOL, APL has done that, and a few other local company has also done that. The car carriers that we operate locally, they have ladies engineers and captain on the ship.
I think it all depends. I think it all depends on certain companies' policies as well. You know,
we need to change that. All company policies must be changed to ensure that we have equal access to that particular profession. I think it's also part of training and capacity building and changing the mindset within the industry. We need to have a major campaign about, you know, women in the industry, women seafarers today. We have a shortage of seafarers around the world. So one is young people and two it's women. This ought to be where the industry ought to be moving.
Yes, I agree with you. I
think the union side, in fact, they do have a training arm, you know, and you can see from the, you know, the cadets that been trained. There are some lady, you know, cadets inside. Am I correct?
Yeah, we did train some lady cadets. Yeah.
Because one of the advantage of having women in the industry, then you will get more men also want to join the industry, and that increase the pool of you know, people joining seafaring as a career.
And maternity protection is provided for in the convention.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, we need a push on gender then. Now, we're getting into the last couple of minutes of our program, so there's a couple of things that I just think we need to clarify. And Cleo, I'd like to ask you, the complaints procedure, how does that work under the MLC?
Well, one of the things about the MLC, I think one of the strengths of the MLC is the documentation of practices on board the ship to make sure that they comply with the convention. So one of the areas that have to be documented is, for example, is hours of work and rest. And that is part of the inspection regime. And so this is a very important area. Of course, complaints procedures have to be in writing, have to be properly posted on board the ship. The onboard ship complaints procedures, and of course the possibility for onshore complaints. But these are all procedures that require adequate and appropriate documentation. The employment agreement for seafarers is part of the documentation that is required to be inspected, like the complaint procedures when the inspector boards the ship to ensure compliance with the Maritime Labour Convention. So that is part of the 14 areas that are included, and that must be, the necessary documentation must be available for inspection on board ship when the port state control inspector arrives. And of course, which means that the flag state must, in certifying that ship, also ensure that it is in compliance with these 14 items. So complaints is important. And a critical tool, and one that is going to be very helpful to seafarers today, and has a non-discrimination clause and a non-victimization clause, because you can complain.
Right, and one final question for you, Cleo. People have talked about potential universal ratification for the MLC. In a sentence, is it possible, is it important?
It is possible, it is important, and it will happen. The only question, probably the question mark may be countries that have considered they have no maritime interests at all, because they have neither seafarers nor ships and are landlocked. But even those, we have important landlocked countries that have maritime interest. Switzerland is one, and it has ratified the convention.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that. And there's a lot more we could talk about, but unfortunately we're out of time. And so that question brings us to the end of this special broadcast from ILO Television, marking the entry into the force of the new Maritime Labour Convention. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists, Cleopatra Doumbia-Henry from the ILO, Captain Robin Fu of the Singapore Maritime Officers Union, Daniel Tan of the Singapore Shipping Association, and Mark Lin, Deputy Director of Shipping and Deputy Director of Marine and Maritime at the Port Authority of Singapore. I'd also like to thank Adam Bowers for keeping his eye on the social media for us. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Sophie.
And I'd like to thank the captain and the crew of the APL Yangshan, this marvellous ship which has been hosting us today, and wish them bon voyage and safe sailing on their next voyage. They leave as soon as we come off air. Thanks to you all for sending in your comments. I'm sorry we didn't have time to conclude them. Hopefully we'll be able to do so next time. Goodbye from the APL Yangshan and Singapore.